Ladies and gentlemen, the program is about to begin. Please take a moment to silence your mobile devices. We would like to remind you that food and drink are not permitted in the theater. Also, please note that photography and audio and video recording is prohibited. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michele Gray, the Director of Programming for the New York Times live conversation series TimesTalks, which pairs New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest creative minds from the fields of film, theater, music, science, art, literature, and fashion. To find out who's coming next, go to timestalks.com and subscribe to our newsletter. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event, live here in New York and live on the New York Times Facebook page and timestalks.com. We're thrilled to be welcoming literary sensation and feminist icon Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, here to celebrate her latest book, Dear Ijeawele, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions. Adichie, who is the recipient of the 2008 MacArthur Fellowship Award and author of the best-selling titles Americanah and We Should All Be Feminists, writes a powerful new statement about feminism today. You will hear much more about tonight's guest from our moderator, Radhika Jones, the New York Times editorial director of books. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Radhika Jones and to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I am honored to be sharing the stage with a writer I have admired from afar for many years. I'm so happy that you could be here.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk first about the new book, which you wrote as a letter to a dear friend on the occasion of the birth of her daughter. It's such an intimate gesture and such a private thing. What made you decide to give it to the public?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for that very kind welcome. And thank you for being here. And it's lovely to share a stage with you, because I read you. And it's also, I remember also thinking, seeing a picture of you, thinking, she's such a babe. So, so there was that. No. But, and you're right, it started off as my friend telling me that she wanted to raise her daughter feminist. And actually what she said was, I want to raise her so she doesn't take the kind of nonsense that I took. I want her life to be better than mine. And there was something in it that was both moving and sad, because I thought in many ways it's an act of love. And also I think it's really the mark of being a parent, that you want better for your child. And then to be asked to be part of this process was a little overwhelming. And I wrote her the email, but I also thought, the best thing I can do for her, because I care about her, is to be honest and practical. Mm-hmm. And it became also for me a map of my own feminist thinking, because I realized after I wrote it that I had never actually sat down to write about the things I think we should do differently. And I've talked a lot about we really should raise girls and boys differently, but I had never really sat down to write it down. And it was shorter than the book is, because I made some changes. Why did I decide to? Really because I think I have a bit of a messiah complex, and I confess, and there's a part of me that wants to help. And this is not always a good thing. I have the impulse to help, and that can often mean crossing boundaries and getting in people's spaces to tell them, here's what you need to do, making and there had been all of these debates in Nigeria about women's roles, and I would often meet young women, particularly young African women, who would say to me, I identify as feminist, but I don't really know what that means in practical terms in my life. I don't know what the feminist answer to this is. And so part of my making the choice to release it was hoping that it would be helpful to some people, because in many ways my feminist vision isn't about theory or about theorizing or about sort of arguing about things. It's more practical and pragmatic. It's me constantly thinking about how can we actually make people's lives better. And so I hope that if this book came out, that women, particularly women who are mothers, but women in general, would maybe find it just useful in that kind of, well, this is what the feminist thing is. And I also hope that it might demystify feminism, if that makes sense. Because I think, and I felt that the young women who would ask me, what's the feminist answer, that it had become a burden to them. Right? That this idea, I'm a feminist, therefore, and I just thought it shouldn't be. I hope it's not for young women. I hope it's that, I mean, in the end, it's about trying, and it's about justice, but it's not about beating yourself up. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You say in that book, and also in We Should All Be Feminists, you talk about the challenges of not just of learning maybe what the feminist response is, but also unlearning as you move through your life and begin to make different kinds of choices, unlearning those gender assumptions. Yeah. What are some of the things that you've unlearned as you've gone on this path?
I realized recently that I'm still unlearning. I mean, I'd like to say that I've unlearned it all, but I haven't. And that's why it's important to say to young women, you know, don't be hard on yourself. It's hard. If you have been exposed to something consistently for a long time, you're living in a world that is not a feminist world. You absorb things without necessarily even knowing that you absorb them. Somebody had said to me a few days ago about a doctor, and I said, what did he say? And then I caught myself. I was like, what the hell? And it turned out the doctor was a woman. And
so that's good news, by the way.
Of course. I mean, to me, not only is it good news, it's normal, because, you know, the world is full of women doctors. But again, that conditioning, and they said, oh, we saw a doctor, and I said, what did he say? Mm-hmm. Which, again, brings me to language, because I remember thinking, had I said it in Igbo, which doesn't have masculine and feminine pronouns, I would have gotten a pass, because it's the same pronoun for man and woman in Igbo, but I said it in English, so I was caught. But I think the major thing that I think I have just unlearned, is that idea that my equality is conditional, that your full worth as a woman is something that in some spaces can be conditional. So people in Nigeria will say to me, you know, as long as your husband allows you to do this, that's fine, that kind of thing. Or they would say to daughters, I mean, even that idea that somehow your brother is your protector, mm-hmm. which in many ways is ostensibly well-meaning, but I just completely reject that, because there's a kind of power inequality that it suggests. You know, my brother is my brother, he's not my protector. I mean, because then there's also kind of a sense of ownership that your brothers and your fathers and the male people in your life are encouraged to have over you because of that idea of being protected. I haven't learned that.
You can't protect yourself.
Yeah, and of course that you can't protect yourself, right? And also that you can never be their protector. I mean, so I've unlearned ideas of not mattering equally. I think there are all of these subtle cues you get that you don't matter as much, and I just didn't get that memo.
And in the meantime, you've become a mother.
I have, yes.
And so you're raising your own feminist daughter.
Yes.
What about... More good news. What has surprised you about motherhood?
The love, just the newness, the completeness, the wholesomeness of this love. It's just a different thing from anything I've ever experienced in my life. And I've just been, and you know, you kind of read and you know that you're going to love your child, but then the love happens and it's overwhelming. And if she has a diaper rash and she's crying, I feel it. And so it's the love, and also a sense of, in some ways I think the love comes with a sense of helplessness, because I want to protect her from everything and I realize I can't. And there's something about it that makes you think about, you know, the world being this fragile place and everything being fragile. And it makes things a bit more precious. It makes you want to be present. It makes me look at I'm looking at her discovering things. You know, we'll go to the playground and she picks up a wood chip and she wants to put it in her mouth. And even that I just find ridiculous joy in. So I'm like, she wants to eat the wood chip, you know? There's that, but there's also just more that all of the things, I realize now that many things that before for me were ideological concerns, not that I didn't care about them, but I felt slightly removed from them. But now they've become so urgent. Even just the idea of living in a feminist world, a fair world, a just world has become suddenly so much more urgent to me, because I'm thinking this is the world she's going to live in. And like my friend, Ijeawele, I want my daughter's life to be better than mine.
So there's a lot of very serious stuff in this book. I don't know how many of you have read it. There's a lot of gravitas there, but there was a little bit that made me laugh, and I want to read it back to you and ask a little bit about the family you grew up in. This is in the first of the 15 suggestions, which is to be a full person. And you write, "Our mothers worked full-time while we were growing up, and we turned out well. At least you did. The jury is still out on me." So we'll come back to the juries later. But tell us a little bit about your upbringing. What did your mother do?
My mother retired as the registrar of the University of Nigeria, and she was the first woman to be registrar, which meant that she was the first woman to be head of the entire entire non-academic section of the university, and it was a big deal. And she was, very much a big madame, and she was very inspirational to many other women. I think continues to be. And growing up, my parents were their time and place are very progressive people. My father was born in 1932, and he is just really the loveliest, gentlest, kindest man, and quite progressive. So growing up, for example, my mother didn't, I have friends who have much sort of harsher stories of, I was a girl, so I wasn't allowed to go out to, I had to stay home and do all the domestic work, and my brothers played. It wasn't quite like that with me. My mother made sure we all did domestic work, my brothers and me. But I remember that I was the one who needed to learn to cook. And we had house helps. And my mother would say to me, "Go and stay in the kitchen because you need to learn how to cook." And then the justification would be, because you'll have to cook in your husband's house. And I remember even then as a child thinking, I don't think I want to be in a husband's house. Because it seemed to me a place that was talked about only in terms of a certain kind of domestic servitude. What are you going to do in your husband's house? If you keep doing that, you're not going to find a husband. And I was just thinking, I'd rather really just go out and play badminton with my brothers. But it was also in many ways, a childhood that I feel very grateful for, because it was happy, because my parents were loving people, because my family is very close-knit, and also mostly because my parents allowed me to be a little strange. And I mean that in the best of ways, and I feel very grateful for it now, because I didn't always conform. I was the child who was, I asked questions, and they kind of gave me room. And I'm not sure how much of that is because they already had 2 stable daughters in whom they could take appropriate pride. Therefore, I think they could sacrifice me. So, but they did, and I just feel I feel very grateful.
Were you the youngest?
The second youngest, the 5th of 6 children.
And did you learn to cook?
I did. I did. I actually, it's interesting talking about this, because for a long time, I wouldn't talk about, and in some ways I still don't. I'm talking about it now, obviously, but talking about cooking is something I avoid because it is such a loaded thing. But I'm actually quite a good cook when I'm in a good mood. But I just wouldn't participate in the cooking. Because for me, it's so connected to that idea of domestic work and caregiving being something that women should do as a part of something that makes them, sort of gives them a kind of human worth. And I just have such a problem with that idea. And
was part of your strangeness that you were a big reader?
No, because my family was a reading family. My brother, actually probably read more than I did when we were growing up. My father was a professor of statistics, but he's a reader. My mom, not so much. She reads fashion magazines, but I didn't mean that in a bad way. But no, my reading was encouraged. So we were a family of, books were ordinary.
Mm-hmm. What did you read?
I read everything. When I think about it now, I recently went back to reread a book that I first read when I was 11. And it's Inside the Third Reich by Albert Speer's book. And I was fascinated by that book at 11. And I suddenly thought, why? So I've actually gone back and I've just started reading it again because I want to know why that book. I mean, I read that book very sort of intensely when I was 11. I read everything. My very early reading was, as is the case, I think, with most children in Anglophone Africa, very British. So I was reading Enid Blyton, and I knew everything about the Famous Five and the Secret Seven, and then I went through the phase of reading Mills and Boon romances, and I read almost all of them, if not all. Then I went through the phase of crime, and James Hadley Chase, who is a writer nobody outside of Anglophone Africa knows, but everybody who grew up in Nigeria and Kenya and Ghana, we read all the James Hadley Chase thrillers. And they were set in the US, and apparently he was an Englishman who invented this America in his head and wrote crime novels about it. And I later understood they did not do well in the US because they were not really about the US. But of course, we are in Nigeria, and they had titles like, No Orchids for Miss Blandish, Would You Like a Hole in the Head? I can't remember anymore. You find him, I'll fix him. So just to let you know. But we read them and we would
They sound very intriguing.
I know, we would pass them around and they give me such pleasure, really. And then also I read a lot of crime, a lot of Sidney Sheldon and Robert Ludlum and all of those things. And I recently went back to reread some of them and I couldn't get past 2 pages. And it's said to me something that I'm very interested in the ways that we change and how what we read changes and how we read, I think, changes. And then I just started reading, and then at some point I just completely fell in love with there's a wonderful series called the African Writers Series, published by Heinemann, and I think I read everything there, and that's when I started to develop a kind of Pan-African consciousness because I just adored. I mean, I remember this book set in countries I don't even think I really actively knew existed, like, a book set in Conakry in Guinea, and I'm like, oh, so there's that country, and things, and people are there, and it's all quite normal, and so I love those. But then I also read the history of the Catholic Church at the age of, I guess, 10, and then I would argue with priests about, when I think about it now, like, I don't even know why, but it was also just wanting, and so because I read quickly as well, I just read everything I found. And the only thing I couldn't read were my father's journals because it was statistics, so it was mostly numbers and didn't make much sense. So.
And you were raised Catholic, right?
I was, yes.
What is your relationship to the faith now?
That's a very lovely way of asking.
Well, I was raised Catholic too, so I ask myself the same question.
And I've often thought about Catholicism being not merely just a religion, but a kind of culture. And that I think of it as something that is under your skin. It's there. I mean, you might not go, you might not practice, but you kind of remain Catholic in a certain sort of way. And I think that before Pope Francis, I mean, because I was a person who asked questions, I think not surprisingly had many problems with the church and the church's official positions in many things. Birth control, for example. I mean, I know many, many people in Nigeria who are very personally affected by this. Women who do not want to have more children, but who subscribe to this idea that if you use birth control, you're sinning, and so they end up having more children than they can raise properly, and it just... And even just, small, yeah. So I had many questions and many problems with the church's position. So at some point I stopped going to Mass because, actually I stopped going to Mass when I came to the US. And that was after going to Mass in New Haven, where a priest spent all his time just delivering this harangue about how people had to vote for the candidate who opposed abortion. And I thought, this is what Catholicism in this country is. It's just political screaming about abortion. as though nothing else matters, you know. And the tradition of Catholicism that I admire is a kind of more, social work tradition, and I just didn't see that. But with the election of Pope Francis, who I find a very inspirational figure and a very human figure, it's kind of made the Catholic Church, I don't know. And I think two things. It's the Pope, and it's also having a daughter, and I want to give her the option of faith. So and because the Catholic Church is what I know. I mean, it's interesting that I am a major critic of the Catholic Church on many levels, but if non-Catholics are criticizing the church, I just find that I'm ever so slightly getting defensive and bristling. And I find that I'm always holding myself back from jumping into full defense mode and saying, well, you don't really understand how we do things in the Catholic Church. So it's a complicated relationship, I think. Yeah.
So as you were doing all this reading as a child, when did it occur to you that you might become a writer? Did it cross your mind?
No, because I was just writing. Mm-hmm. So I hadn't, and I think in some ways, because I grew up in a culture that didn't elevate writing. So the things that were elevated were things like medicine and law. So a child wanting to be a writer wasn't a thing that was necessarily admired. So I don't know that many people, as I think happens here, spent their time thinking, I don't think I'm a real writer. How will I become a writer? No, because nobody really cares in Nigeria about you wanting to be a writer. And I've been writing since I was old enough to spell. And I think I just wrote. And I think when I was 7, I thought I was a writer because I wrote stories. I think that two things for me, that the writing is the thing that, writing gives me meaning. It gives me meaning in a very personal way, and it's something I've been doing and something I will keep doing. I got very fortunate and was published, right? And people actually read what I wrote. But if that hadn't happened, I would still be writing. So that for me too, the writing is kind of different from the publishing. I made the choice to be published. I wanted to be published, but I think of it as a separate thing from my writing. My writing is much more personal. It's the thing that when it's going well, it's the thing that makes me happiest.
So do you, because you have been so acclaimed in your career with the Orange Prize for Half a Yellow Sun and with the MacArthur Grant and a very wide and worldwide readership, do you, when you think about this sort of the distinction between writing for pleasure and also being a published writer, how do you measure success? Was there a moment where you thought, oh, I'm good at this, I can do this, or is it, how does that work for you?
How do I measure success? That's a very good question. I quite like getting prizes. Especially when it comes with money, it's quite lovely. So that's always nice. And also, you can never get too many. Never mind what anybody says. You're just like, I'll take one more. And I'm always, because I think the thing about writing, and it's interesting because there's a sense in which validation is such an important part of the process. I wish it wasn't, but it is. And prizes are validation. It's sort of a way of somebody saying to you, we kind of think you did okay with this. But I've also realized, and I realized I think very early on, that it's a very fleeting thing. The prize happens and you're happy and you're grateful, but it very, very quickly passes. And it's not that you forget, but it's not something you actively carry with you. So I go into my study and I sit down to write. I don't remember. I really don't remember that I've won prizes, because in many ways the creative process is still the same for me. There's still a sense of kind of hopeful exhilaration, but there's also incredible fear and there's anxiety that it's not going to go well, that, it hasn't changed. I mean, it's the same today as it was 20 years ago, the process for me, even the physicality of it, that I kind of wander around often when it's not going well. I just start wandering around and I'm, not terribly stable. But, so I think for me, success is if I write something that I'm happy with. Yeah, I think that's how I would measure success. Because there have been things that I have liked quite a bit, that have not necessarily been liked as much as I would want them to be liked, but I've been very, for me, it's counted as success. And yeah, there are times when things that have been published, so sometimes I'll open a page of my novel and I'll read a bit of it and I'll just think, why the hell did somebody publish this? And I get very, I just think, oh, I should have edited that out. And then there are other times I read something and I think, not bad. I mean, recently I was at a school and a short story that I wrote many years ago that I actually had forgotten about, that the school was kind enough to dramatize the short story. And I was sitting there in the audience watching it. And I was very moved by it, right? But then the part of me that has a very big glowing ego was also kind of like, that's not bad at all. By the way, by which I meant the story, not the dramatization. and then I started to worry what that, I was like, is that even a normal? But anyway, no. But just to say, I think sometimes I think the talk that success, I think particularly in this culture, is talked about as though it's something you reach and you stay there, and it's a level thing, and I don't think it is at all. Mm-hmm. I think it's always that, and if one is to talk about it honestly, and you're never. I hope I never get complacent, but also, for me, my work is never quite finished, which maybe is why when I look at some pages, I think that should have gone. That shouldn't have come. And I think that's also why it's good to have an editor who sometimes tells you, all right, it's done, just give it to me.
So take us through a day of writing.
Well, a good or a bad one?
Well, which one is more dramatic?
Bad. Good one, I sit there and the thing for me about fiction writing is that it has the capacity to transport me. I find that I lose a sense of time. When the writing is going well, I'm sitting there and I'm writing, and when I look up, I think, oh my God, it's been 3 hours, and I really didn't know. And I also find that I'm very singularly focused on it. I don't want to shower. A shower is a waste of time because I need to be, my phone is off. I mean, that's out of the question. When it's, and then at the end of it, when I've written, but also I'm quite a slow writer. And so, I spend 3 hours and I have 2 paragraphs, but I'm kind of happy with them. But I find that at the end of a good writing day, I'm just happy, right? So I'm actually fairly pleasant to be around. and I find that it's just such a good, life is good. Then sometimes I'll cook. But when it's a bad day, it's not good. I mean, I'm just so grumpy. It's just not pleasant at all. I mean, it's all kinds of things happen. It's not good. And then there's I'm learning to sort of manage the bad writing days because it's very easy for me to just spiral into thinking, I'll never write a good sentence again. And then that's where the fear and anxiety come in. And so I've learned what I do is I tell myself, just let it go and read. Just, leave it alone and go and read. Because sometimes I'll sit at my table. It's not working, but I'm sitting there. And the anxiety builds up. So I'm learning to, and I also find that when I'm writing fiction, I read a lot of poetry. And I find that it just helps me. So I'll just leave it alone and I'll go curl up and I'll read poetry. And I let the words, I don't read poetry as puzzle. I don't read poetry to figure out. I read poetry to let the language wash over me. And I do that a lot when my writing isn't going well. And then I eat ice cream and chocolate. That also often helps.
I'm an editor, so I'm always interested in people's relationships with their editors. Are you the sort of writer who works and works and works and then says, here it is, or do you have more of a back and forth with your editor?
I'm a bit. No, I need to be in control. So, I need to do what I'm doing, and then when I feel that I'm almost done, I'll let somebody else look at it.
Yeah.
But I also have, it's not just my editor, it's also that I have about 3 first readers, people who are my friends, who I love and trust, but who also tell me the truth. And I think that it's been essential for me to have them because, and they're such different people and read in such different ways, and it makes me just see my world and makes me see things I wouldn't have seen before. And it's very useful for me, and they tell me the truth. So one of them is he's Nigerian, he's in his mid-50s, he's an engineer, and he's very sort of practical. So he'll read a sentence that I think is very pretty, and he'll be like, this doesn't even make sense. And it makes me go back and think, you know what, he's right. And so having that is very useful for me.
Mm-hmm. And these are people who they're obviously giving you feedback in different ways than someone who's sort of in the business and has that particular mentality.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love about your novels is how comprehensive they are. They contain love stories, there are wars, there is destitution, there is racism and misogyny, and there's food and drink and hair care and children. And this is more than many novelists take on in a whole lifetime of work. There are so many novelists who kind of find a zone and that's where they live. Yeah. And it makes me wonder, what comes first for you when you're thinking about a new project, particularly a novel? Is it an idea? Is it plot? Is it character?
It's sometimes all of those things. It's hard for me, and I think it depends on. I think it's been different for each of the novels that I've written. I know, for example, that Purple Hibiscus, my first novel, or at least my first novel that was published, came from just this acute feeling of homesickness and nostalgia. And I remember very clearly, it was my first American winter. It was snowing, it was so cold, I was so miserable. And suddenly I just felt, it was like a mood. There was a mood of just deep longing for home. I wanted Nsukka, where I grew up. I wanted sunshine. I wanted even the smells of home. And the novel came from there. And in some ways, the novel obviously isn't about my life, but I think that in it, there's a keen sense of longing and almost like a romanticized idea of home. And it came from that cold winter. There have been, I think there have been times when it's been character, and there are times when it's story. I mean, story matters to me. I'm a writer who thinks plot is a good thing, right? And I say that because I know that some literary writers who don't think so. But I don't think, I never quite know my full plots. For me, it's so much better not to know because the writing process for me is a discovery. If I knew the entire story, I don't think I would want to write it. So it's never quite plot, but it's sometimes character. Sometimes it's a voice. Sometimes it's almost like an intuition. Right now, no, I can't talk about right now, what I'm thinking. I think I was about to go running my mouth, but I'll stop.
You're working on something.
I'm a superstitious Igbo woman.
We'll hope for the best.
Tell you that. If I talk about it, it will disappear.
I was looking in preparation back at Americanah, and I remembered how in that novel there's so much hope around the election of Barack Obama. And you published it in 2013, a year after his re-election, and now here we are. And I just wonder, do you think, of course it was always an illusion that Obama would magically bring about a post-racial America, and I think most people knew that was an illusion, but I think maybe we didn't expect quite the about face. And I wondered if you think, having thought so much about these issues, do you think, what, if anything, do you think has changed? Has there been progress, even in the kinds of issues that we're willing to raise and talk about, or the ways that we're willing to talk about race in America?
Talking about progress when it comes to race in this country just always makes me uncertain because obviously on the one hand, honestly, I don't know. I don't know. I do think, though, that I think that Donald Trump is as much America as Barack Obama. And I think it's important to acknowledge that because otherwise it makes it difficult to even engage with the subject. I think that there are people who wish that Donald Trump wasn't as much America as Barack Obama, but he is. He is. And in some ways, I also think that Donald Trump happened because of Barack Obama. That had Barack Obama not happened, Donald Trump probably wouldn't have happened. I mean, never mind the more obvious thing that this person made himself relevant by instituting a racist campaign called Betherism. But even disregarding that, I think there's something about this country that I think will take a long time to. I never felt that Barack Obama's election meant that America will become post-racial, because I think that's just very wishful thinking. You can't correct 300 years of injustice by having a token. You just don't. And in some ways, I think that Donald Trump is proof of that. Right? That he's America. This is what America got. I mean, there are ways in which to grasp for silver linings and say that maybe it's made people know not to be complacent about what a democracy is, and it's made people realize that you have to get up and, apart from just get up and vote, you have to be aware and alert, because I think there's much to be said for the Democrats who stayed home. Right? There's much to be said. And yes, we know that the person who's president won, but how he won. It just kind of makes you think, yeah, this is a strange system.
Yeah. We're not going to solve this one here, are we?
No, I guess not. I guess not.
You've said, and some of your characters have echoed this sentiment, that your consciousness of race really started when you landed in America, that it wasn't something that was with you in Nigeria, that there were different distinctions made, but not about race per se. And so it was really issues around feminism, about being a girl and being a woman. Those were the things that came to you sooner. Those were the things that occupied your mind. Now you live in America part-time, and you have both of these things operative, as all women of color in America do. How do those, of course you can't separate selves, you can't put yourself into different boxes, but I'm interested in, now that you're raising a daughter too, how do those identities inform each other?
I don't even know. I don't choose the days that I'm black and the days that I'm a woman, right? Because sometimes I wish I could. So then you sort of know what you're dealing with.
Right. Why is this thing happening?
Exactly.
Right, because...
Exactly. If I can separate them, I'm like, all right, so that's the race and that's the woman bit. I like to tell a story about how when people send cars to pick me up for things, and when I appear, and usually it's a white man who's the driver, and usually because it's sort of a fancy pants car, I guess he's not used to picking up people like me. And usually when I appear, I'm always watching the expression, and there's always surprise. Sometimes it's benign surprise. Other times it's surprise that has a streak of something ugly underneath it. And I find myself often thinking, how much of that is race and how much of that is gender? Right? Is he thinking, what the hell? It's this girl child that I'm picking up. Is he thinking, what? This black, right? I'm like, which one is it? So, race and gender are, they're always intertwined for me. Maybe there are times when, I don't know, I'm much more aware of gender in Nigeria only because, you know why, actually? I think only because race isn't there. Mm-hmm. When I get off the plane in Lagos, I completely forget about being black. It just doesn't occur to me. I get off the plane in Atlanta, and I get on the plane in Lagos, the flight to Atlanta, and I'm immediately aware how many black people are in the cabin, right? Race is so present. And the thing about race that's so interesting is that it's not that, it's that you go into a store and somebody's rude to you in this country. In Nigeria, I think that person is an idiot. That person is having a bad day, or I actually have come across in a way that hasn't been very nice. Maybe I'm having a hormonal day myself, right? So these are three options. I don't really ever think in Nigeria somebody's rude because I'm a woman, because when it happens, it's clear. I know when it happens. In the US, somebody's rude to me. I'm thinking they're having a bad day. They're just really just idiots. I'm hormonal, or they're racist. And it's having that extra thing that I just wish I didn't have to deal with, because it's a thing you're thinking, all right, why did she just say that? And sometimes it's not, But even having to think when is it and when it's not is exhausting. It's mentally exhausting. So getting off the plane in Lagos is to get rid of that source of mental exhaustion and face other sources of mental exhaustion. I don't know, raising my daughter, I was thinking I don't even want her to know that, I don't want her to think of blackness as particularly in the way that America has constructed blackness. I think blackness has for so long been associated with negativity in this country that I don't want it to be, I don't want her to learn America's idea of blackness. I don't want her to learn that at all. And I'm going to try and shield her from it. And I'm going to, our vision of blackness is going to be one that I grew up with, which is blackness as ordinary and normal, and blackness as, when I came to the US, I realized that black achievement was seen as extraordinary. Right? And to this day, I can't help but feel a slight sense of irritation when people say so-and-so is the first black American to do so-and-so. And I think actually it should give us pause. We shouldn't be so celebratory. We should stop and think it's really terrible that institutionalized oppression made it impossible for a black person to be this before now, right? And there's a kind of that I find it hard to participate in because for me, that's proof of America's really terrible racist history, that it's taken so long for a black person to reach such a position. And I came from Nigeria where black achievement is ordinary. And so I remember when I came and I like to tell the story of a very small moment when I realized what being black meant in America. And it was my first, I was an undergrad, my first year in America. We'd written essays, handed them in. The professor came back with the essays graded. And he said, this is the best essay I've read. I want to know who wrote it. And he called out my name. And I raised my hand and he looked surprised. And it was a very small moment, but I remember thinking, he's surprised because he didn't expect the person who wrote this essay to be black. And so that moment for me was, really? So this is what, and I, with my, wonderful, glowing, casual Nigerian arrogance, which is something that we Nigerians are just, it's every morning we have a glass of casual arrogance for breakfast.
May I say, you should pass that on to your daughter.
And I remember thinking, I really genuinely just felt, what the hell? I mean, does he not know I'm Nigerian? Does he not know that we're all brilliant in my country? Right? I was like, what is he, what? But it then started a process for me because, and it makes you question the whole construction of race and blackness because it's absurd. And it then also made me go and learn about American history because I didn't know very much. And I think it's true for many immigrants who come here. We don't know. And you come here and you absorb stereotypes and people tell you, oh, black Americans are lazy. And if you don't know, I mean, if you see that the ghettos in this country, are full of African Americans and somebody tells you, oh, that's because they're lazy. If you don't know the history of just, horrible institutionalized discrimination, you won't understand, right? And so it took me reading and learning to suddenly think, oh, my Lord, right? And so I think it's just going to take a long time for America to make it right.
You've been very willing to write about political subjects and issues. You wrote in the last year, you wrote a tribute to Michelle Obama.
I did.
Which was beautiful. You wrote a short story for the New York Times Book Review about Melania Trump. The first line modeled on Mrs. Dalloway.
Yes.
You obviously are speaking out about feminism. You received some criticism recently for some remarks about trans women, and you've responded to that. You're, more than many American writers, at least it strikes me, you're willing to get into the fray. And I wonder, maybe it's the casual Nigerian arrogance, in which case we should all be drinking it. But do you feel as a writer that you have that place in the public sphere? Do you feel pressure to do more of it, to do less of it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because do I feel pressure? No, because I don't really, I mean, if there's any, I don't. But I think maybe, in some ways what's kind of interesting is I never really set out So somebody once said to me, "You're an activist," and it gave me pause because I thought, I don't think of myself as an activist. I sometimes wonder how much of it is a person who just speaks her mind. And because, I think if you speak your mind directly, and if you're not very apologetic about the space you occupy, then it immediately takes on meanings that you don't necessarily intend for it to take on. I think that my writing, I've always been a child who was interested in politics and in history, and I think, again, that idea of, I really do ache for a better world. I really do just find things that I want and wish would change. And it's also just a very, in some ways, very corny thing, but it's that I want people to be happier, and I want love to be in the world. I mean, it's sort of like being in a beauty pageant and you're asked, "What do you want?" And you say, "World peace." But it's true, I really do want that, right? I genuinely want a world of justice for everybody and peace and all of that, which I think necessarily means just constantly existing in this space of dissatisfaction. And therefore talking about it, and I think it often comes with consequences, but if you care about something, you talk about them. Feminism, I just never planned to be, when Michele said feminist icon, I just thought, oh my Lord. There's something about it that, I don't know that I necessarily want to be a feminist icon, on the one hand, there are very lovely things that happened. So young women who come up to me and say, "Because of you, I feel stronger," or "Because of you," again, it means the world to me. It makes me very happy. But on the other hand, it can often be limiting because then people, in some ways related to what you said about the controversy, people then expect certain things of you, the certain ways you're supposed to talk because you have been made this thing. And in some ways, the thing for me that's sad is that there's the risk of your humanity being lost. Because you're no longer seen as a textured person. You just become the icon. And it's almost as though, press the button and let her say what we want her to say. And there's something about that makes me uncomfortable. I speak about feminism because I care very deeply about it and because I hope that it means something to other people, but I want to be allowed to remain a human being, a flawed human being.
We are going to take a couple of questions from Facebook Live, I think. Here we go.
You're smiling, the sound. Let's hear it.
So, these are tough questions. I'm smiling because I'm glad I don't have to answer these questions. These are difficult questions. What do you think about the image feminists tend to get about being aggressive or being haters?
The image feminists have of being aggressive or being haters?
That feminists are aggressive, that feminists are, hate men.
I think people who have that view don't necessarily mean well in general, because that's not true. And I also think that aggressive, the words that we are very judgmental about when we apply them to women, but not necessarily to men. And in some ways, for me, aggressive, there are times in one's life that one needs to be aggressive. And both women and men, I think that's a good thing. Right? So the words I just even don't think women should run away from. I think women should own them. And I do think that feminist is a loaded word because of all of these negative stereotypes. And part of the reason that I think it's important to talk about it is to take back ownership of that word.
Here's a tactical question. What are your thoughts on how the women's rights movements can sustain momentum?
I don't know.
Leave that one to the experts. They're tough questions, right? These are difficult questions. Do you see, this is from Allie Barton, do you see a difference in how feminism is practiced in Nigeria and America?
Yes, I think feminism is always contextual. Yes, I think in general, and at the risk of simplifying, I think it gets slightly easier for women in Nigeria as they get older. I think it gets slightly more difficult for women in the US as they get older. Because I think to be young and female in this country is to sometimes be shielded from the realities because things are not as overt. But I think as you get older and become more invisible in more ways than one, and that's where the more structural things, I think, kick in. That's when, I mean, when you're 12, you don't really, the pay gap doesn't really affect you. Right? But then when you're 55, it does. And I think just just the kind of invisibility of older women in this country. There's a kind of, for me, very disturbing worshipping of youth that I find just strange. You know, youth is lovely, you know, God bless the young, but, you know, I kind of feel like I want to learn, and I don't know that the young necessarily have much to teach me. But there's everything is so, I mean, they talk about advertising, the cultural production in this country. I look at magazines and everything is about people, I've never even heard of them. And we're supposed to, you know, we're supposed to care about what they're doing with their lives. And I think that's nice, but I would like to know about women who are, you know, 55. I'd like to learn about their experiences. I'd like to, you know, sort of mine their wisdom. And I feel as though there's no mainstream space in this culture that celebrates women who are past a certain age, women of, I think, all races and classes. It just doesn't happen. In Nigeria, because it's still a culture that largely respects age, as a woman gets older, there's just a bit more respect that comes, that it's as though age starts to shape gender. Mm-hmm. So people have often said that the worst thing to be in Nigeria is young and female, and then occupy any position of power. It's just the worst thing to be. But if you're, I mean, a friend of mine was saying to me, she's young, she's you know, very interesting, intelligent. She has this very good job. And she said to me that once her driver, who was an older man, was very disrespectful towards her. And then he said to her, well, madam, it would be better if you had some stature, by which he meant if you were bigger, which in some ways connotes age. It's sort of, if you were a big madam, then I could kind of tolerate walking for you. You know? I mean, and I also think about how in this country, I think in some ways, there's something refreshing about Nigeria's sexism because you know what you're dealing with. Right? In this country, it's layered. It's so layered that it becomes mentally exhausting. And also, I think there's a lot more pressure on women here to prove sexism. I mean, look at what's happening with Hillary Clinton. And it's interesting to me how still many ostensibly intelligent people are completely dismissive of the fact that misogyny played even the smallest role in how she was covered. And it's kind of okay to dismiss it, right? But I feel like in Nigeria, Nigerians will tell you very plainly, a woman cannot be a governor. So at least that way you know what you're dealing with, right? So that if you're going to run, you kind of know how to deal with it. And in this country, so women in this country are expected to be sexy, right? Sexy is good. Sexual is not, right? You can't be a sexual being in this country. I mean, this whole idea of slut shaming, which is an expression I dislike. But even the whole conversations about rape and consent, I feel as though we're still not talking about the fundamental thing underneath it, which is that still sexuality is not allowed women, right? Female sexuality is still a thing we're so uncomfortable about. In Nigeria, they're very open. Do not be sexy, do not be sexual. So we're like, right? There's nothing to be confused about. And I feel as though, I don't think any is better or worse, but there is something to be said for something being refreshingly obvious, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think we're ready to take some questions from the audience. Now, I actually can't see any of you. Oh, there you are. So we have microphones coming around, and speak into the mic so that they can hear you on the internet.
Hi, Ms. Adichie. I just want to tell you that for me, I think one of the most powerful things I read from you the other day was, and I'm just going to paraphrase this, knowledge of cooking is not installed in the vagina. And I remember, I was in my room reading it, and I started sharing because, like you, I grew up in West Africa. I grew up in Ghana. I had 4 brothers. They were all, I was the only one who had to learn how to cook. I was cooking since I was 8 years old. And when I decided to get married, I said, need to find a man who can cook. And that was a tall order. Like I did eventually find the man who could cook. But in my 30s and 40s, we had to go through this farce where when his family came to visit, I had to go and cook. So finally, a few years ago, I said, you know what? I'm not pretending anymore. I'm not doing this. So when I saw that quote, I actually screenshot it and I sent it to everybody I know. And so I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. And actually, can I also just say that even just hearing you speak is inspiring to me. When you said, I just decided to stop pretending. And I want to thank you for that. Yes. It strengthens me to hear that.
Thank you so much for your words. I wanted to ask, you had mentioned that your family left you space to kind of be weird, to be different, to kind of be yourself in that way. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that looked like as a kid?
No, you don't want to know. No, I think just more in the sense of being a child who asked more questions than children are generally expected to ask in the culture in which I grew up. There's a sense in which questioning elders is often seen as disrespect. My parents didn't see it as disrespect. So my questioning, and not just questioning, my disagreeing. I mean, I was a child who sort of smugly thought I could tell adults that they didn't know something. Why the hell that happened, I don't know. So I would sort of argue with even my teachers. But also it was actually because they were wrong sometimes. No, but my parents, so it was kind of that room to ask questions, and they humored me. They would respond to my questions. They would, if I said I disagreed with something, I got the sense that I was allowed to disagree. And I find that it's a way to give a child, and it's not to say that then I was allowed, because sometimes they would say to me, no, you're wrong, sit down, right? So I did have discipline in a sort of also old-fashioned way, right? But it was just a sense of being allowed to be a full person, and it's having a certain confidence. I mean, it meant that your parents thought that you were worthy of, that they saw me. That's what it was. And really, increasingly, what I think about is that to be loved is to be seen and to be known.
Thank you so much.
Is this on? Yeah, it is. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm just incredibly honored. One of the great privileges of my life is I've actually gotten to meet a few of the MacArthur Genius Award winners, and not necessarily people who everybody knows, but I've gotten a chance to know them. And when I think about that word genius, I mean, and seeing their lives and seeing some of what you talked about in terms of even being able to grow up so expressive, I'm in awe with that, and not because of just sort of the prize at the end, but the history and the growth and the maturation that comes with being able to bring forth genius. When you hear the word genius, what does that do?
Nothing. Honestly, I'm just, it doesn't do anything for me. And I do have to say, there's something to be said for, I can't even say that word with a straight face. But it's such a strange, I don't think I'm a genius. I mean, I don't need to be a genius. I think there's something finished about the idea of a genius. I don't think I'm finished. I think that I'm growing and I'm learning. And, I mean, I very much loved the money that came with it, right? But I could have done, I mean, that whole genius thing, come on. I mean, there are times when even when people say it about me and I'm being introduced, I don't know what the hell to do with my face. Like, should I smile? Should I look away? Genius? It's just strange. It really genuinely doesn't do anything for me. The recognition I found very, I was very honored. It meant that meant very, I mean, even apart from the money, just being part of this group of just really remarkable people who've done very interesting work in the world was wonderful. And it's that sense of validation that happens, but not the genius part. Thank you.
Hi. Oh, someone else? No. Okay. Here.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to know, a lot of times when I talk to men in my life about feminism and I get so excited about it, I know that they believe in equal rights for women and they want to celebrate women, but they're hesitant about that word, feminist. They're hesitant to be feminist themselves. And then I try to convince them not to feel that tension, and then I get upset because I think, why do I need to prove myself? You know, do you think we need men in our feminism?
Do you know that saying, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a vessel?
And I mean it more, do we need them to be on board with our agency, you know?
Do we need them? I mean, I think it's, and by the way, I feel that as well in many situations in my own life. I mean, when in the book I write about how sexism makes me particularly angry because in my own personal space, unlike racism, I don't have to prove, I'm not asked or expected to make a case for it. The people I know and love know that anti-black racism is a real thing in the world. The people I know and love don't always seem to extend that understanding when it comes to sexism. And so I'm often asked, well, maybe it wasn't misogyny with Hillary Clinton. Maybe it was just that, you know, she wore those pantsuits or something. I mean, you know, to which I then say, yeah, but that is misogyny. But do we need men for female agency? No. Do we need men for feminism and to create a feminist world? Yes. We do need men. Men have to come on board. We do. We share the world with men. I mean, the idea of feminism as this exclusive thing that, and I even want to ever so slightly challenge the idea of celebrating women. I'm always worried when we create the idea of women as special. Women are not special. We're not. We're just normal. We're ordinary. We're human like men. And it worries me when we start the discourse of women as special because I think it's dangerous. Because it can lead to oppression. I mean, that idea of stay home, you can't drive, you can't walk because you're special. Right? Just stay home, don't do anything. Don't exercise your full humanity because you're special. And even the other idea that women are somehow inherently more gentle and more caring, like, nope, they're not. They're not. I mean, I think if we're honest about it, they're not. Women, and they shouldn't be, I think is even more important to say, that we should allow women a full range. We should have, in the way that the full range of humanity, that, you know, there are as many kind men as there are unkind men in the world. It's the same with women. And so when people say, let's have women rule the world and we won't have wars, I'm like, go to a girls' boarding school, right? Go to a girls' boarding school, right? I mean, that idea that, so, but men, I mean, and I would ask them, these people you talk about, why? Why are they resistant to label themselves feminist? Because there's a part of me that feels that if you really do care about gender justice, you shouldn't be hung up on stereotypes about a word. You know, I mean, we need a word around which to rally, and the dictionary meaning of feminism, I think, works very well. And you know, so yeah, I mean, I think that resistance has layers that are worth unpacking. Good luck.
So,
but don't stop, please, don't.
So there's a question. So my question on this side, sorry. Hi. Hi, thank you very much. This has been really fascinating, and I feel so honored being here. I'm such a big fan. So my question is, totally hear you on the anti-black racism. I'm raising a teenage daughter myself in America. I'm from Africa. And, you know, for me, interestingly, the biggest concern I have for her being here and when we go back home, I'm from South Africa, is not so much the black racism, it's the colorism. You know, she, increasingly, that's something that she worries about a lot and is really affected by. And I don't know if everyone in the audience knows sort of what I mean when I say colorism, but pretty much amongst blacks, the lighter skinned you are, straighter your hair. That seems to be even more problematic for my daughter, who knows anti-black racism, but actually for her and her self-esteem, the things affecting her the most here and back home are colorism. Just wanted to hear your thoughts about that, any observations that you have about that. And then a little half question. What are you reading to your daughter as you raise her to be a feminist? I'd love to hear that.
I'm actually fascinated by that, and I'm you know, having a child has also meant for me collecting wisdom from other women, and I think it's a very important thing to do. And so now I'm going to file that away because I think there's a sense in which being older of a certain, you know, I think of myself as older. Colorism and maybe sort of slightly wiser. It seems colorism is something that it seems to me self-evidently foolish. But clearly, it's something that affects deeply young girls. We need to. There's a newspaper editor who was talking to me, and she said, well, what do we do? What do we do about this problem of having a very, because I was talking about having a very limited notion of what was aspirational in female beauty. And I said, that just maybe a few too many pages of thin white women. And she said, oh, it's so difficult. What do we do? And I said, actually, it's not. Right? I mean, if you have the power, you're an editor. What you do is, if you have an editor, you decide to have 2 pages of thin white women, 2 pages of white women who are not thin, 2 pages of black women, and please, can they not all sort of have that sort of ambiguous loop where we're not sure, are they black? Can they be black? Right? Where I'm like, can they actually be black? And, I don't think it's that difficult. And then, can you have Asian women? And can we understand that Asian doesn't mean one thing? Can we have East Asian and can we have South? It's actually not that hard. And I think that women, people, and I said to her, I also think that commercially it will work. Because people want to see the world reflected as it is. It's the way that we talked about, people talk about films and they say, oh, black films, nobody wants to, people watch them, right? They do well. So I think there's a lot to be said for the images that our girls see, because it doesn't obviously come from inside. It doesn't come from her home, right? It comes from the outside. And I think it's hard because I don't think that you as a parent can entirely control it. And so it means then that we really sort of have to start picketing the fashion magazines and the whatever the hell those. I don't even know what young children. I don't know what they read and where they get the ideas of. Yeah, and I think also the natural hair community, my sisters in the natural hair movement, can we please agree that it's time to stop pretending as though if your curls are not loose, you're somehow not doing something right? Can we agree that 4C hair is as good as some of our dear white sisters are like, what the hell are they talking about? Can we agree that 4C hair? Because I think that also matters, because now that's an internal thing, right? In the natural hair sort of community, many, many black women are going natural, which I think is it just makes me happy to see women wearing their hair in all kinds of sort of permutations. But what I increasingly see is that idea that what we call, the defined curl means that we're trying to approximate a certain kind of biracial hair type. And I find that very troubling. So you go out of your way, you do this thing, so your hair has that. But I'm like, no, but my curl pattern, that's not my curl pattern. My curl pattern is what happens when my hair is washed and nicely moisturized. It's very tight and kinky. That's my curl pattern. Right? But so even that, I think, needs to... and I feel as though we don't... And I feel that one of the things in this country that's very interesting is that the fear of being seen... There's a reluctance to be uncomfortable. There's a reluctance to speak a certain truth in a way because, if you say, for example, how about we also acknowledge that 4C hair is important? People think, oh my God, you're anti-3C hair. But you're not. The idea that we can't hold multiple things at the same time is very troubling. I think that's part of the problem. Because now, if you talk about, look, why don't we have a few dark-skinned women? People are like, oh my God, you're anti-light-skinned women. No, but you're not. It's about a range. So, yeah, you should start a movement and picket people who need to be picketed. Good luck.
Hi.
We have time for one more.
Right here. What you said this a little bit earlier, and it really spoke to me because I find myself struggling with this, to be able to come out of it. You said when you want world peace, you're constantly dissatisfied with the world. And that's what I feel a lot of lately. I'm 23, so I feel like I'm kind of coming into my actual adult understanding of politics and international affairs and things like that. And I find myself not able to turn that off, to turn off the dissatisfaction. And I feel like it's kind of straining other aspects of my life. I would like to be able to go to a bar with my friends without getting into an argument with a guy about white privilege. How do you manage that in other ways?
I love that cackle.
Obviously, writing, I would assume, is your outlet for that. But do you have other ways? Do you find yourself struggling with that as well?
Not as much, because I think when you get older, you start to... There's a lot to be said for getting older. Really, there is. It's true. And I think, I mean, when I was younger, I really couldn't stand it when older people said to me, "You're still young, you'll understand." And I used to want to smack them. But now that I'm going to be 40 this year, and there's something about, and I think particularly for women, I think we really come into our own when we get a bit older. We're a lot more comfortable in who we are, because when you're younger, there's just so much that but what I do want to say to you is, you have to enjoy your life, right? And I understand what you mean about dissatisfaction and getting into those arguments, but also remember, it can often come, there's a kind of sanctimony, a kind of self-righteousness that can be blinding, right? And I think it's important, and I say this only because in some ways I was like you at 23, right? I was smug, I was sanctimonious, I gave lectures to people, I thought I knew it all. We actually don't know it all, and you know, and even the person you're having the argument with about white privilege, I think it's also important to see the humanity in that white person, right? And to realize that privilege blinds us. I mean, so even the people who are, I mean, I think it's important in these conversations that we're having not to be so quick to assume ill intent, and more to assume, to sort of head towards ignorance more than sort of malice or ill intent. And you know, yes, there's the anger about the world being so terrible, but everybody's dealing with some kind of shit. Honestly, right? So, and the other thing I would suggest, and I wish somebody had told me, is to go read as much as I can about the things that make me very angry. Do you know, I mean, just to, the things that I do now in my sort of almost 40-year-old moments of rage about injustice in the world is, you know, I deliver rants. That is also good. But I read. I want to understand. And I increasingly see that the world is full of contradiction, and it's never, I mean, the world is not ideologically pure. It isn't. And there's a sense in which it takes a certain kind of, I don't know, it takes a certain kind, it's both a wisdom and a humility to make peace with it, right? To say that I don't know that we're ever going to create a world that is perfect, but I do believe in incremental progress, right? So I feel as though, so have the argument at the bar, it's not a bad thing. You know, raise your voice, scream, have a rant, and then you might actually even become friends with them and sort of say to them, can you see why, in a very calm way, I'm not saying that you're evil, but can you see why having the skin that you have in the society in which you have gives you a leg up in ways that somebody who doesn't have that doesn't? I mean, and it doesn't mean that you're a devil. It just means that this society needs to find ways to destroy the structures that make it happen, right? But good luck, you have lovely hair, and please enjoy your life.
I think that's our final note. Wise words for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.